Welcome, everyone. You are with the Tribal Youth Resource Center, and this is a two-part online learning event. This is Session 1, Promising Approaches in Tribal Community Truancy Prevention Programming. Today's session is presented by myself, Anna Clough. I am an employee of the Tribal Youth Resource Center, Tribal Law and Policy Institute, and currently serve as the Assistant Director. My co-host is Alan Rabideau. He also works with the Tribal Youth Resource Center and serves as a Training and Technical Assistance Specialist. We're glad you're here today, and thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. We're looking forward to today's session. So to get to know everyone and give a few more minutes for people to join, if you want to type in the chat box and let us know who you are, if you're currently working in a truancy prevention program or tribal youth program, where you're joining from. If you're a member of a tribe, feel free to share that as well. We really appreciate everyone joining today, and we hope that the information and material that we share is helpful to you in your work with tribal youth. And while you're sharing, thank you so much. Welcome, Joshua. Hi, Preston. Thank you for joining today. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for sharing. If you see someone you know, feel free to use the chat box to say hello. We're also going to have a little chat. So if you are currently working in a truancy prevention program, or you're just looking at addressing this issue in your community, please feel free to share any current challenges that you're facing. So if you're working with youth, what are the issues related to truancy, chronic absenteeism, and your juvenile justice system? Hi, Joy.
We also have Cameron. Welcome, Cameron. Ooh, we got some Anchorage.
I know. I'm seeing people joining from all over. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm not typing in the chat, but I'm joining right from the middle of Oklahoma. It's finally starting to cool off this week. Super excited about that. Welcome, Gilberto, Martina. So happy everybody is joining. Hi, Kimberly. So we have our Rural CAP partners up in Alaska joining today. So for those of you that are in Alaska, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, good morning, Alaska.
So I know we started off with a couple of different sharing options. So one is just who you are and where you're from, and then if you're working in truancy prevention, what challenges are you currently facing related to truancy, chronic absenteeism, and working in the juvenile justice setting?
We're not seeing many challenges. Anybody have any quick challenges they want to share?
Yes, I actually have some challenges.
Oh, we have somebody unmuted.
Go ahead. Who is speaking?
Hello. Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm the truancy officer for the Hannahville Indian community in Michigan. And
welcome.
thank you. One of the issues that we're currently having is that we have a process where notification letters go out from the school to the families, letting them know when their student has hit a certain number of unexcused absences or tardies, so that we can make them aware of it. And then we have a process where there's a meeting at the school when they hit the next stage, and then we have a meeting with the prosecutor after that, explaining the tribal law with school attendance before we ever get to any type of petition in the court to try and prevent that from happening and offer services to help. And so we're not getting the letters sent out on a timely manner or with any regularity. And then when we do have a truancy petition, there's no consequence on the court side of things. What we end up having is a student who has 12 different court hearings over 2 years with minimal improvement, and there's no consequences. So we currently have students who will even age out before they can receive the diploma due to not getting credits because of having so many absences and missing so much school.
Oh.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that's one of the things we'll talk about later in the session. I know that's a pretty specific example of what's happening, but maybe we can brainstorm together and talk about some options that might be helpful. As well, this is just part one, so this is more of an introduction to the topic of truancy prevention and more of an analysis about, the education system and American Indian youth. And so we're really excited that this is going to be a several-part series. Part 2 is going to be next week. And we're going to have some other truancy prevention programs joining us. And so I think if we don't answer that question today, we'll definitely have the opportunity to talk with some other program staff that might have some good ideas for you. So with that, thank you so much for sharing. And again, we are going to have a couple of stopping points for discussion and chat. We really love when you all share, and we'd love to interact with you. And so when we do hit a stopping point, don't be afraid to jump in, ask a question. We will kind of be moving through the material when we get through everything today, but we hope that if you do have a question, feel free to use the chat box, or if you want to ask us, that's completely fine. So thank you so much for being with us. So Laura, do you want to share some tech reminders really quickly?
Absolutely. My name is Laura. I'm a program assistant with the Tribal Law and Policy Institute with Tribal Youth Resource Center. Thank you so much for joining us today. A few notes just related to the Adobe platform. One is that during this presentation, we'll primarily be using the chat box and Q&A, so all attendees from this point on, the phone lines will be muted. And when questions come up during the presentation, please ask them in the Q&A box that you can see on the top right corner of your screen. And just below that, there's a chat box for us all to participate in group discussions, so please contribute your thoughts in there. And then finally, we have some files that are available for download. In the bottom right-hand corner, there's a tab that says Files, and you can download all of our handouts from that pod, and that includes the PowerPoint slides that we'll be looking at today.
Thank you so much, Laura. And if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A box, or if you have any technical issues, just let us know. So greetings, Anna Clough, Muskogee Creek, and Yuchi. I live here in Oklahoma, and I have had the wonderful opportunity to work for the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Training and Technical Assistance Programs for about the last 3.5, almost 4 years. And I currently serve as the Assistant Director for our program, which is located at the Tribal Law and Policy Institute. So thank you for joining. I know several of you that are online today, so hello to those of you that I do know. And for those that I haven't met yet, I look forward to meeting you if you're an OJJDP grantee. And if you're joining as a non-tribal grantee, welcome. Feel free to connect with us anytime. And Alan, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. And my name is Alan Rabideau. I'm Ojibwe or Anishinaabe My Anishinaabe name is Yawenadandini. I actually work for the University of Montana, the National Native Children's Trauma Center, but I am located in a citizen here of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe in Upper Michigan. I am also part of the Tribal Youth Resource Center. So happy to be here and welcome everyone.
Thank you. So we are sponsored by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. We're the Tribal Youth Resource Center, and we're at the Tribal Law and Policy Institute. And we currently have a partnership with the National Native Children's Trauma Center, which is located at the University of Montana. We do have a website, www.tribalyouth.org. There are a number of resources and materials that you can access there. There's also a form that you can fill out if you're looking for free training and technical assistance. It's available to all OJJDP-funded grantees as well as any federally recognized tribe. So if there's anything you hear about today that you're interested in learning more about, or if you would like to request on-site training related to any of our programs and services, feel free to visit our website and request training and technical assistance at any time. You can also visit ojjdp.gov to learn more about the funding opportunities that are available through OJJDP, as well as a number of programs, services, resources, and materials that are available for public download. Alan, I'll let you talk a little bit about the National Native Children's Trauma Center. Alan might be on mute. So like I said before, we are in a partnership with the National Native Children's Trauma Center. They are located at the University of Montana. They are a member of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and have a number of training opportunities that are available if you'd like to learn more about trauma-informed care. Specifically focusing on the impact of trauma on American Indian and Alaska Native children and youth. As a partner agency, the resources and training opportunities that are available through the National Native Children's Trauma Center are available through our center as well. So you can visit both their website, which is on the screen, and all of these links will be available in the materials that are available for download. You can visit their website or our website at any time to request training and technical assistance.
And I'm back now, Anna, by the way. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, you did a good job. Thank you.
Great. I've heard the intro many times now. So as a training and technical assistance provider for OJJDP, we really want to focus our services on promoting resources, training opportunities for the tribal specific and relevant to your communities. We hope that the information that you hear today is relevant. We, as a staff, bring in the understanding and appreciation of the history, custom, and the justice systems that you all are operating. And we do believe that children are sacred. So we believe that what we're sharing today is important, that the work that you're doing is important, and we're really glad as a team that we're here and able to support you. We currently work with federally recognized tribes, grantees. Our main supports through OJJDP are Tribal Youth Program grantees and Tribal Juvenile Healing to Wellness Courts. We hope that the work that we're doing there is supporting the innovative programs that you all are developing, and we hope that we're providing responsive strategies that help you as you continue to serve tribal youth. So we are finally to today's material. So this is part one of a two-part series. We really wanted to be able to give some more baseline understanding of truancy prevention in Indian country, as well give more of a historic overview of the impact of education policy that has impacted American Indian youth. We're going to talk today about trauma-informed and family-engaged truancy prevention programming, and then we're going to survey a few approaches that have been utilized in truancy prevention to support communities. And session two is going to actually have some programmatic staff joining us. We have some guest speakers. We're really excited about that. And so it will be at the same time next week on Thursday, 1 o'clock Central, and you'll be hearing from Pascal Yaki's Attendance Achievement Program. So we're really happy, and like I said before, if there's questions that come up today, we're happy to save those and kind of put them in the parking lot until next week, and look forward to the opportunity to engage with you all and come up with some strategies if you are facing issues in your community. So with that, let's get started. So why are we discussing truancy prevention? I think everyone here today knows that truancy prevention is really important. We know that it's often a stepping stone to dropping out of school. It can affect graduation. The consequences are both short-term and long-term. So we know that the short-term impact is the gap in education, children who languish in the system, justice involvement, and then you look at long-term consequences for adults and the impact on the broader community. So we're going to talk a little bit about terminology, and I think one of the major issues when you look at research and information on truancy is the fact that there are competing definitions for what truancy is. And so one of the things that we wanted to do today for purposes of the learning session is focusing really on the broader definitions of truancy and chronic absenteeism, but we still feel that it's important to define terms. And the reason that we feel that it's important to define terms is that when you are working in a programmatic setting, it's important to set individual policies, creating definitions that can serve both the programs that you're working with. So if you're working with a local school district, if you're working with parents, if you're working with youth, having clear definitions of what that means is important. It's important for your own data collection and then for your own understanding when you're looking at the broader scope of truancy and research and broader studies, understanding that there's differences in how people define truancy and chronic absenteeism. So we're going to walk through these definitions. So as I said before, there is no singular definition of truancy. There are a number of studies that note that there are numerous definitions to define truancy. Truancy can apply to a one-time event, an all or part of a day, part of an activity, or even just one unexcused absence from school. So the definition that we arrived at for today's session is being absent from school or activity without permission of a parent or a guardian, or missing a single class without permission of the teacher or the administrator in charge. So this may be all or a portion of a day. This could even be an activity that they are supposed to participate in outside of school. These are events that could be labeled as truancy. So we move to habitual truancy. This is more than a one-time event. This is really where the student moves from occasional absence toward a pattern that may begin to involve school officials, truancy officers, or truancy program intervention. There was actually a state sampling from 2005 that again noted the difference between labeling habitual truancy. It was interesting to see that different states labeled habitual truancy from anywhere between 2 and 12 absences. So depending on which state you were in, 2 absences could be labeled habitual truancy. 12 absences was where they arrived at to label a habitual truancy. So each state or tribe has its own school or attendance requirements that will specify the age in which a child should be enrolled, when they may legally drop out, and the number of absences that constitute truancy. And we included a number of resources today in the download pod. There's actually a study that had a breakdown of the states and what the absences were for each state. I didn't include that today because I didn't want to overwhelm you, but I do have that study, and if you're interested in that, I can share that with you individually. So chronic truancy can refer to students who have been disciplined according to procedure after meeting criteria for habitual truancy, and that they continue to accumulate unlawful absences despite a court or a school mandate. And so This is where many of you might arrive, as you're working with students who have already been disciplined or in the process of being disciplined for truancy activity, and they continue to be truant in spite of the intervention. So these are students who have already received notes or who have already received a citation or have been involved in the justice system because of the truancy activity. And one of the issues with chronic truancy and habitual truancy is that we see that when there's interventions and communications in the school, there are more severe consequences like fines and jail time that may impact parents. And one of the things that we wanted to note is that the Juvenile Justice and Prevention Act has addressed the criminalization of status offenses for quite some time and trying to remove that label of status offenses for truancy. We know that less restrictive community-based programs should be in place to address youth who commit status offenses. However, there are exceptions in the JJDPA, like the valid court order exception. And so we know that youth can still be detained if they fail to follow court orders. And so one of the interesting things is that the new Juvenile Justice Reform Act does address the valid court order exception. And so there's now language that courts must issue specific orders and factual circumstances about violations of status offenses like truancy. And so we are looking at a change in the way that we approach truancy and status offenses in the juvenile justice system, but really what we want to look at is prevention in general. So chronic absenteeism is defined as missing significant portions of an academic year. This is applied to students who miss generally about 10% or 18 days of the school year. When we talk about chronic absenteeism, we're not applying it only to youth, but we may look at it applying more broadly to younger children since they're more dependent on their family and parents, caregivers to get them to school. We know that chronic absenteeism is significantly more common amongst economically disadvantaged students. So I really like this chart, a cross comparison between truancy and chronic absence. And so when we talk about truancy, we're looking at that emphasizing the court rules, compliance with school policy. It's heavily reliant on legal and administrative solutions. When we talk about chronic absence, really it's a viewpoint of looking at the academic impact of missed days and utilizing community-based positive strategies. And I don't think that it's not happening related to truancy. I think that's where the movement is toward, is looking at more community-based early prevention strategies. But we know for a fact that, truancy can lead to those criminal consequences. Whereas we're looking at chronic absence, we're trying to look at, how can we impact these youth early on to support their, increased educational access, really bringing the family together and trying to look at what are the issues related to their absence and how can we bring them back into school and not get to that point of truancy as an older student. So some of the consequences of truancy, which many of you are aware, and is the reason that we're trying to address this issue, is that the fact that truancy moves youth toward lower grades. They repeat grades more often. They have higher rates of expulsion, and they have lower rates of high school graduation.
And Anna, just to add, you do use the term truancy here, but again, chronic absenteeism or whatever term you want to use, it's, the outcomes are the same for all.
Correct. So we're looking at, when there's that gap in the education, when they're missing large portions of school, these are long-term impacts that, both short and long-term impacts that really can affect youth and, the way that they're able to engage long-term. Truancy has widespread impact both individually and collectively. It is an early warning sign for delinquent activity, social isolation, or even educational failure. And one of the studies that I read talked about adults. So adults who are frequently truant as adolescents are more likely to live in poverty, utilize the welfare system extensively, have children themselves with problematic behaviors, end up being incarcerated as an adult, have poor physical or mental health, and work in low-paying jobs. And so it's important for us to do as much as we can to address this issue because we see the long-term impact both individually and collectively when this issue is not addressed. And Alan, I know in your work when we talk about children and families living in generational poverty and some of the stresses that can cause. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, schooling is such a big part of a youth socialization and day schedule that when they don't have that structured day scheduling, there's a whole slew of issues that can arise in, with the delinquent behaviors and, how they're spending their time and, just it causes a whole bunch of issues in the community. So really important issue here.
Thank you. So we have a discussion point. Alan, I'll let you read this question.
So I guess we're kind of interested right now. So currently, what kind of prevention or truancy prevention or absenteeism efforts are you making? If you could post some things that you're currently doing in the chat book to share. And also, what target age range are you looking at? Are you noticing differences between, say, junior high and high school or elementary and junior high? And maybe even some examples of some of what, the interventions that you're actually providing. If people can share in the chat box, that'd be great.
And I saw when we first started chatting, a few of you did share that you are working in truancy prevention programs now. I saw Preston talk about school attendance policy, local school attendance policy in their children's code, and some issues with not being able to prosecute for truancy due to the school policy. So we know that there are issues that arise when we're looking at that overlap of jurisdiction, also, local youth who attend public schools, and the lack of, the ability to kind of intervene early on when you don't have some kind of tribal liaison working between the local community and then the public school setting.
So we have some people typing right now. Just give them a minute here to see if anybody can share.
While we're waiting for people to type, one of the things I wanted to know about chronic absenteeism is that terminology we talk about. So one is, as the center, when we're talking about truancy, we're not talking about, I think we want to communicate that we don't want to label students, so we don't want to label students as, they're truants or about the activity generally, chronic absenteeism, and so that term I know is being more heavily utilized due to the Every Student Succeeds Act. So that was passed in 2015, and schools are using chronic absenteeism as one of the indicators to help measure school quality and student success. So that's a term that we may be seeing more heavily in research and materials and things that are coming out, and we're going to talk a little bit here in just a little bit. Yep, go ahead.
So we have some people sharing some using attendance incentives. It's really good to see that incentives are being used, gift cards for like Xbox and stuff. I think, it's just as we get in later into the conversation a little bit more about a trauma-informed approach, this idea of focusing on rewards rather than sanctions I think is an important thing to remember. And we have one person that does it across elementary, middle school, and high school. You know, there's a lot of research and debate out there about, so when there's like truancy issues, when is it important to intervene? Is it more important to intervene in your elementary years as opposed to middle school years or, you know, high school years?
Thank you for sharing that, and I definitely agree with the incentive programs. Those are the core components of an effective program is looking at a meaningful so a program where you're working with youth, both things.
I also like these comments about people that, you know, they are doing something in different counties and, you know, they have sat down, they have had the discussion, but then the problem, of course, is follow through. You know, you do all this work planning and thinking of solutions, and then the issue then becomes in how do you follow through, kind of like our first participant in our situation was sending letters home in a timely fashion.
Right. So thank you all for sharing. I know that if you're developing your programs, hearing what other communities are doing is helpful to see some of the ideas. I see something from Salt River coming in here. They're focusing on students ages 5 to 17, and there's intervention and prevention strategies with the collaboration of several of their tribal departments, and then working with behavioral health and family preservation. So I think those are all really great things. I know, Alan, you're a really big proponent of wraparound, and I think that approach is a really good way to ensure that, you know, you're not just addressing that immediate, just why you're not in school. It's more the whole holistic approach of, you know, what services can be provided to that youth. So thank you for sharing. We are going to continue to work through this session. So we did want to talk about a brief history of American Indian education, and we are going to move through this really quickly because it was more to share where are we at when we look at federal policy and the shifts over, you know, the last 200 years. And so one thing we did want to share is that we're really excited that this fall we are working on a publication related to truancy prevention, and in that publication there will be a little bit broader breakdown of, you know, the history of American Indian education and legislation and policy, both historical and contemporary. And so today is just a brief overview, and if you're interested in learning more, you'll be able to check out our publication here in the next month or so. But we know that there is a major impact on our communities due to education policy by the U.S. government. When we look at both contemporary federal, state, and policies, we know that there has been a shift, but at the same time, we know that it takes a lot for tribes to engage meaningfully with states. And so it's important for us to look at strategies to integrate the services that we can offer to youth and really work to build partnerships with states and counties and then in our tribal schools. So if you take a look back over history, we know that we started out with the mission school era, and this is where Congress, to encourage benevolent societies to provide education for Indian tribes, provided authorization to encourage, and I use quotation, civilization programs. And so this was a very, I think, dark era in American Indian education. We know that the long-term impacts of the trauma from government day and boarding schools and the mission school era are noted throughout our communities. And so throughout the 1800s, we know that federal policy shifted towards assimilation and Western education of American Indian children. So it wasn't just compulsory education. It really was trying to remove culture from our youth. Treaties between the U.S. government and Native nations contained provisions for educating Indians, and the theory was that teaching English and math skills was necessary for Native youth to exist in Anglo-America. The Indian Office of the Federal Government developed and expanded the system of day and boarding schools throughout the 1800s, one of the most prolific being the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in 1879. These were run like military schools. In the early 1900s, we have the Merriam Report that came out. The results of this study provided an in-depth discussion and recommendations related to the state of Indian education. It was completed by the Institute of Government Research, and it condemned the deplorable policies of removing Indian children from their homes and denounced the grossly inadequate conditions of boarding schools. In 1934, we note the individual of John Collier. He was appointed by President Roosevelt, and he was the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He was an advocate for American Indians. I know that there's some historical dispute about both the positive and negative impacts of your work, but there was a reclamation of Indian policy to the Wheelhouse, also known as the Organization. This is sometimes called Indian. And the act contains notes about educating citizens. It also moved toward more, I wouldn't say softer, but a more inclusive approach in the schools that were in existence. And started to incorporate some language and some bilingual syllabi in the government-run schools. We see also the Johnson-O'Malley Act coming into effect in 1934. This was also supported by John Collier. It offered federal dollars for Native American education, healthcare, agricultural assistance programs. JOM funding is still existent today, and it's designed to meet the specialized and unique educational needs of eligible Indian students. We then moved to the Self-Determination era, so Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act of 1974. This was where we see a shift in the turnaround of policy towards American Indians. In the 60s and 70s, we see the Indian Self-Determination Act coming into effect, and the government can now contract with tribal governments for federal services. This rejuvenated many tribal governments by admitting and rejecting and countering previous paternalistic policies. It also opened up the opportunity to operate, tribes could operate their own schools. Since this act was passed, more than 70 schools have taken charge of their own operations, and we now have the ability to take control of our education systems. This includes bringing in our own language, beliefs, and philosophies into the schools. And there are a number of tribes across the state that are doing this, or across the country, sorry. Important act was the Indian Education Act of 1972. This was landmark legislation that established a comprehensive approach to meeting the unique needs of American Indian and Alaska Native students. The unique aspects of the original authority have been retained through subsequent legislative reauthorizations, and there were recognition that American Indians have unique educational and culturally related academic needs and distinct language and cultural needs. This is the only comprehensive federal Indian education legislation that deals with American Indian education from preschool to graduate level education. It focuses national attention on the educational needs of American Indian learners, and it provides services to American Indians and Alaska Natives that are not provided by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Then we moved to more contemporary legislation like No Child Left Behind, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and most recently the Johnson-O'Malley Supplemental Education Modernization Act. So I didn't want to bore everyone with a history of education policy towards American Indians, but I feel like it's important for us to have a viewpoint of when we don't look back at, what are these long-term historic traumas that occurred, and then we look at the transition of the way policy was conducted in the 1800s to what we're dealing with contemporarily. And so even though these last three acts, are specific, and fortunately the Every Student Succeeds Act did address tribal-specific issues, there's still a long way to go. I think that the fact that they're even requesting that states collaborate with tribes, I think that's a step in the right direction, but I think we all know that there's still a lot of things that we can do to, hopefully increase the ability for tribes to support their youth that are attending public schools. Alan, did you have anything about the kind of historical view? And I know we just touched on boarding schools really briefly, but any comments about that?
No, I think we'll cover more in a little bit of detail when we talk about trauma-informed care and about this idea of moving from kind of that punitive, harsh approach to now with the ability to support our students in schools with specifically with cultural events, which really helps students.
Thank you. So one of the things that we do when we look at, what is the current data telling us? And I know that there's a lot of negative things that happen. We know there's positive things happening as well, but when we talk about why truancy prevention is so important and why collaboration is important is because we know that, 90% of the youth that we are working with, they go to non-tribal public schools. Within these schools, we know that there are low performance rates. There are disproportionate rates of suspension. They're expelled more often. They represent, a very low percentage of the actual school attendance, but then they have higher rates of suspension and being expelled. A very low graduation rates, twice the national average. I thought this was interesting when we look at chronic absenteeism and truancy prevention. In Minnesota, American Indian youth were missing more than 10% of the school year. It was higher than the other populations in Minnesota. California noted the same thing. They had the higher rates of chronic absenteeism amongst American Indian youth. And a 2016 report indicated that Native American and Pacific Islanders were more likely to be chronically absent than students of other races. So we know that this is an issue in our community. That's why we're talking about it today. What are the strategies to help change some of this data that we're receiving? And we also know that it's really hard to collect data when we don't have, research isn't looking at American Indian populations, but from the data we do have, we see that American Indian youth really need some supportive intervention and prevention activities. So understanding the factors that are related to truancy is really important. And so this is usually broken down into 4 main categories: student-specific factors, family-specific factors, school-specific factors, and community-specific factors. So first we're going to talk about student-specific factors. So some of the reasons that a youth may not be going to school is when we look at physical and mental health problems, substance use, drug use, perception of self, detachment from school, teenage motherhood, a low academic performance generally, already repaid, lack of relationships with adults, negative peer influences, and bullying. And so these are some of them that are noted based on public research and data. There may be more specific, are they not go to school, miss school, or family factors that come in, and I'm going to let Alan talk about those.
So in family factors, I think about, the level of the parents' education, as far as parent supervision skills and abilities, and how much they rely on their children to get themselves up for school. Household income has a huge issue, especially, in today's school with sports and other extracurricular activities, the costs that are involved and stuff like that. At-home responsibilities are also something that's important to consider there. I can remember a case where a student was missing a lot of school during the winter time, but because he was, one of the responsibilities at home was to help prepare the firewood for the winter for the heating season. And so that was more important to the family to make sure that everybody was out cutting wood and piling wood. There's also, family events that happen in everybody's lives with deaths in the family and separations and stuff like that will impact students' attendance. And then just, like I said again, conflicting home and school priorities with, a school that sends students home with a lot of homework and maybe the evening times are spent doing chores or such if they're, like, say, on a farm. And I don't know so much, for our communities up here, like in northern Michigan, but there's also language differences that people have to consider. Anna?
I like, just to jump back really quickly to what you shared about those at-home responsibilities and then also the conflicting homeschool priorities. So I know that we talk about different ceremonies and events and activities and things that come up when there's that lack of understanding from the school from, what is excused, what is not excused related to chronic absence. I think that's something that could definitely be discussed if you're working in a tribal program setting. So thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
So when we look at school-specific factors that are related to truancy, we look at school climate. What is the climate at the school? Is the student feel safe there? Are there issues happening in the school that are broader than just that student? How do the teachers approach the youth that are coming in every day? I know that we've seen a rash of school violence, perceptions of youth as they go into schools, perceptions of teachers and the fear that comes up when we look at some of these national incidents of violence. And so those are definitely factors that can impact, youth, either wanting to be in a school setting or not be in a school setting. And I know that's very broad, but it is something to consider. We look at school size, attitudes, the school's ability to meet diverse needs of youth. What are their discipline policies? I know we talked about some issues just now about timing and, how quickly do schools intervene and what are the processes of how they intervene regarding truancy. We consider poor conditions or lack of school facilities, and so if you have a school that, lacks that funding and support, just comfort generally, is this a place where the youth wants to be? That can be a factor for why they don't want to be there. The quality of teachers. I know that when we look at teacher shortages, the skills and abilities of teachers to engage the youth, that's a factor that can come into play. And then poor student interactions. Some bigger issues are geographic access. So we have youth who are very far from the local school that can impact absenteeism. And then student boredom. So, is the curriculum really engaging the student? And there's probably more school-specific factors. These were just a few that we wanted to share today. I'll talk about community.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Yep.
So I guess this kind of really to summarize this. So it really does. This is the approach for truancy or chronic absence should be a holistic kind of community approach. There's community factors also. We've talked about the violence, the drug dealing, the gangs, the issues with bullying. There's also transportation issues, both not only urban and rural, especially if you come from a district where you have school of choice and your child's going to a school in another school district and you have to get them there every day. Also this idea of making the neighborhood safe so that kids can go to school and feel safe. And then also with tribal communities, I think this is an issue too that a lot of tribes are dealing with, particular tribes that have casinos or operate in casinos. This idea of, does the tribe make it mandatory that a person have at least a high school diploma to work in the casino? I know I have plenty of friends that make a good living working in our casino, and the casino didn't require necessarily a specific education level. So that that all impacts a person's, willingness or motivation to do well or, attend school. But it is, I think, like I said, summarizes, it's a very holistic, it's a very much a community issue, and needs to be thought at from a community lens. Anna?
Thank you, Ellen. Yeah, I think we talked about youth and their perceptions of what lies after school. And so when you look at communities that have high rates of poverty, low levels of open and accessible jobs, that can really hinder their views for that future hope of why do I go to school now because I'm not going to get a job anyway, or that sense of hopelessness. And so I think that's something that as part of your truancy prevention programming is really working toward those long-term goals and broader support, so that it's not just addressing that immediate truancy issue, but really looking at long-term support for them as they look towards graduation and then hopefully higher education. So that leads us right into, what are the components of an effective truancy program. And so when we talk about collaboration, we talk about program development with staff, really trying to develop strong partnerships with school board and school administration, however difficult that may be, looking at how you can engage your local tribal government leaders within the school district, and then how can you build partnerships with those youth that are coming into your programs, and then supporting them through, effective collaborations. We're going to talk a little bit about family engagement next, and so I won't go too deep into that bullet. When we look at comprehensive approaches, we're talking about meeting youth where they are. And so I like what was shared earlier in the chat that talked about the program really having a more holistic approach, which means that you're referring these students out for other services as you identify them. And you're looking at not just getting them in school, but where are they at in the curriculum? How are you integrating outside supports like those referral services for mental or behavioral health, other issues, physical, just general wellness within the home? How are you integrating those within your program? I know we've already talked a little bit about meaningful sanctions for truancy, and then also supporting positive incentives for attendance. And so one of the things that has come up is, zero tolerance. So we know that zero tolerance policies do not work. They can actually make a youth engage in truancy even more because they get turned off by the fact that, you basically shut them out, expelled them. We know that those kinds of policies are ineffective. And so really building supportive environments that help the youth, that really engage them and attempt to provide a broad context of services as they come into the program. And then rigorous evaluation assessment. So as you begin to develop your programs, really taking the time to evaluate the services that you're offering, even bringing in someone from the outside to help you assess, what's going well, what is not going well, how can we engage these youth earlier, making sure that those impacts are occurring as quickly as possible, because like we heard before, some of these youth are aging out before the youth actually have the opportunity to have an impact. And so it's important to have programs that are effective and effective sooner rather than later, so that you can actually see the impact and the supports that are going to affect the youth that you're serving. So we wanted to talk as well about the integration of trauma-informed care, and I'll let Alan talk about that.
Yeah, so I think this is a big area, and this in itself can be a webinar, and I encourage people to download in the files pod the NNCPC TTA offerings. They have a whole slew of trauma-informed kind of training and technical assistance that they can provide. But really, trauma-informed care is really these three main ideas. Number one is promoting an understanding of symptoms from a strength-based approach. It's no longer about asking what's wrong, it's about asking what happened. and just really looking at minimizing the risk of re-traumatizing the person or the student. This is, again, I think if we learn anything from history, and that is this harsh approach and these very harsh policies are not effective, and in a lot of ways can re-traumatize people, not only because of historical trauma, but for more recent trauma, for a person to be feeling totally powerless or unable to, do anything for themselves, or, disempowered, I guess you'd say. And to really, offer and identify supports that are what are called trauma-informed. Like I said, look at what NNCTC TTA offerings can offer to help you learn more about trauma-informed approaches in the child-serving systems. So trauma-informed care is really, based on kind of these two overall principles of, first of all, a commitment not only from the program but from the system-wide of becoming trauma-aware. And then, also because of tribal communities is this getting an understanding of the impact of our historical trauma and oppression, and then what they're calling lateral oppression, how today we're even oppressing ourselves or oppression is happening. So as an agency or as a program, it's really about developing policies and procedures and practices that really promote three things: safe environment or safe context. It could be physical, this feeling of trustworthiness with each other, clear, consistent boundaries, transparency, predictability. It's also developing policies and procedures that really restore power to the individual. It's all about giving youth choice and voice, and then really taking it from a strength perspective. So again, reframing situations so you're not looking at the problem, but you're looking at what they need and what strengths they already have to build upon, and really building a person's self-worth. Relationships are a two-way thing, and so it takes two to have a good relationship. So it's a mutual thing that has to happen between two people, and then it's all about respecting each other, having compassion for others, particularly those that, if you do not come from, we all have different situations and experiences in our lives, and it's really trying to put yourself in other people's shoes and being compassionate to their needs and what's happening in their life, and really about acceptance and being non-judgmental about, people. I know we've already heard comments already about it's hard to engage parents. Growing up, I did well in school, but my mother was a high school dropout. And so I think, in her children's years of schooling, when the school contacted her regarding our behavior or attendance or whatever, it was almost, to her a little bit demeaning because she never completed school. And to be very careful in how you, label, issues of going to school and the importance of school with families, understanding where they're coming from. You want to talk about this?
Sure, thank you. So one reason that we wanted to talk about trauma and care and the one that that American youth, suffer from traumatic impacts, and so we have both historic and then present trauma issues that arise when we're talking about developing programs for American Indian youth. And I think that, and I'm just going to go back really quickly. Hold on one second. There was I'm sorry, we're having a little bit of a tech issue here. I'm connecting. So when we're talking about trauma-informed care, I think that voice and choice and empowerment is really important, because when we talk about strategies for truancy Prevention. People emphasize the need for supporting programs that have personalized learning opportunities, developing specific supports for the youth that come into your programs, and really trying to identify those specific needs. And I think that when you build a truancy prevention program that offers that choice and the ability to empower the youth to take part in their educational journey, that's really trauma-informed care. That is a trauma-informed approach. And so just that overlap of how that strategy can easily work into your prevention programming is really important. So this was an example of a logic model that integrated trauma-informed care within a truancy prevention program. So you can see these factors on the left. So we're talking about safety, connectedness, academic and emotional support, challenging and relevant instruction, opportunities, SEL opportunities, and culturally responsive activities. So where those were present, we look at really engaging the educators, supporting them in their leadership opportunity and looking at ways to help them and assist them as they work with the youth, and then looking at the outcomes of student attendance, student engagement, and teacher retention and trust. And so when you look at how to integrate trauma-informed approaches on a school-wide basis, there's those opportunities. There's also what we wanted to talk about was working specifically with youth and addressing trauma. And so one of the exciting things about our partnership with the National Native Children's Trauma Center is that if you are interested in integrating trauma-informed care on a programmatic level with local youth, there is an opportunity to access training through the National Native Children's Trauma Center. So one of the specific training opportunities that they have is cognitive behavioral therapy in schools. This is actually called CBITS, and their staff can go into way more detail than we'll talk about today, but there are opportunities for free training and support to help you if you're interested in looking at a trauma-informed approach in your prevention programming. I'm getting a little bit of background noise.
Yeah, and a good way to access that information is going to tribalyouth.org and clicking on the Make a Request button and making a request for technical assistance on like CBITS and other approaches, and they'll get routed to NNCTC. Are you still with us, Anna?
Yep, I was going to let you talk about family engagement.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so we mentioned earlier that one of the kind of the indicators of a successful truancy prevention or program is family engagement. And in this study that Anna was able to find, there's some factors that parents have indicated that, encourage their involvement. A caring, supportive, and communicative school staff. I think of when I was raising some boys with special needs here, how my phone would ring and it'd be to school, and it was, this fear of dread over coming, like, oh no, what did they do now? Because it seemed like the only time I heard from the school was when the boys were getting in trouble, right? So I did get a call one time, was just more of a, hey, just let you know that Michael did so well today, and that meant a lot. So just, simple changes as, communicating with parents and making sure that the environment that you communicate are culturally respectful, for our teachers to go to powwows and such and communicate with parents on, how their student is doing. Our after schools and activities being offered in the school systems. I know we have a couple grantees in the webinar today who have some after school programming right in the school buildings that bring in not only youth but the families. to do activities with them, culture and other school activities. And then also the hiring or having present an advocate or a liaison in each school. I don't know if it was the Title VII or Johnson O'Malley sometimes could hire homeschool coordinators, if that's still a thing that's happening in public education. So it's really, again, it's that trauma-informed approach, that providing a safe, caring environment, and trying to minimize anything that makes people feel unwelcome or intimidated, and really setting up activities and programs that are good with family scheduling and transportation issues. And also in some cases, you might even have to think about how do you fund childcare for people who have childcare needs in order to partake in these different activities. And then just being aware of the parents' prior negative experiences that they might have had in not only their own education, but education of the other siblings in the home. So really working towards, the left side of the list here and minimizing the right. Family Engagement, the National School Safety Center also identified that involvement of parents in all truancy prevention activities as one of the 5 primary elements of community or educational anti-truancy strategy. We know it's not only in the nation, but many of the child serving systems, like better outcomes, better the parents are involved. A parent is more than mission. It's work. It's hard to do. We could do a webinar on parent engagement and effective parent engagement. I think alone there's a lot to it to consider, but it's really about thinking about, what is authentic engagement. So sometimes it goes beyond just sending home a survey or asking them, doing a focus group. It's really providing opportunities for parents to engage in many levels of the programming or the systems, even delivering services, or being like that, hiring a parent as a liaison, or providing parent support groups so that they can talk about the issues that they're having with their youth and their children with schooling. And then to just remember that parents always should be considered the expert in the lives of their children, and to literally give them the opportunity to share these experiences. It's really about giving them that voice and maintaining that voice at all levels. So the National Parent-Teacher Association has a set of national standards. I don't know if this was something that we provided in the files pod, but if it is something we can provide, Anna, we can upload. But it's really about finding ways to welcome all families into the school, effective communication, supporting student success, making sure that every child is spoken up for and needs are met, sharing power with the families, and really making this a community collaborative effort, so involving the entire community. These are kind of the national standards, again, from the National Parent-Teacher Association.
So,
Anna?
Alan, thank you, Alan. I wanted to just jump back quickly. I know in some other training opportunities that we've had, when we say family, we know in our communities, family can have a broader terminology. So I didn't know if you wanted to note that we're talking about caregivers, obviously the biological family, very important, but when we have situations where there's other caregivers or other legal guardians, that's what we're also communicating, is that that's important to engage those individuals who are involved in the life of the youth.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And I think that also brings up, especially from a trauma-informed approach, one of the ideas is that every child in school should always have at least one adult in their life that they should be able to feel comfortable to go to when they have issues or problems or want to talk to somebody. So not only, do the parents play that role, but there are other adults and paraprofessionals in the school system that can play that role. But just, I think if anything, making sure that every youth know that there's somebody, an adult, a caring adult that they can go to talk about their concerns and issues with.
Thank you. So we had a question I wanted to pause for before we move into an overview of a few programs and examples, and that was about what do you mean by meaningful sanctions for truancy? And so I think when we get to the point where we're talking about sanctions and maybe talking about youth who may already be just as involved, and so if you have a youth in a truancy court setting, I know that there were different examples of, what kind of sanctions might be applicable. And so generally we know that a truancy court can implement fines, they can implement community service, they can implement different experiential things like having to write an essay or some other activity. And so I think one of the terms by meaningful is that we know that fines and costs can actually have a negative impact, and we have youth that can't pay those and families that can't pay those. And so I think when we look at the development of intervention and prevention programs that are working with these youth are opportunities to actually engage the youth, almost like in our wellness court settings, we have incentives that are provided, and we know that an incentivized approach can be way more effective than that punitive approach with youth. And so, when there's times when there's consequences and that are applicable. And so some examples, if you are developing a truancy court in your community, would be things like verbal warnings, community service, increased monitoring or curfew. If you're just working at the programmatic level, you're not in a court-based setting, I think there's a lot of different ways that you could engage with that youth based on, consequences for continuing to be truant or missing school. So I'm excited to talk to our program staff in our session 2, because I think they may have some good ideas for you on, how do they work with youth who continue to miss school. And so we'll definitely bring that up on our next call. Alan, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, just to add to that, thank you for thinking like you. So I think the other thing too, and you mentioned, that effective and meaningful sanctions, to be careful with things like writing an essay, I think reading or writing should never be used as a consequence, especially when reading and writing is supposed to be a positive thing. But the idea again is that, the motivation behind the assignment of community service or essay is to help that youth understand or learn or to practice the appropriate, and it's not so much about, the punishment for the attendance issue or the behavior. Just being mindful, how you're delivering sanctions and in what reference or frame of reference are you putting them so that the youth don't see, writing an essay as a punishment, but, writing an essay as an opportunity to learn. So.
Right. And so one of the programs that we wanted to share today was the Lakuta-Ray-Band's Comprehensive Truancy Prevention Project. So this was a funded project through OJJDP. It's actually ended, but we had the opportunity to interview the coordinator, Kim Lambert, who worked on this project. And one of the things was that get the program started, it's a lot of time to work and meet with the local administrators to get them on board with the program that they wanted to develop. And so it took them almost a year to get the program fully kind of in the school and implemented. And this program was an in-school session. Their school setting was 90 minutes for 4 class periods a day. So she said what would happen is if a student missed, It was almost like they missed 2 days because they had such long class periods. And so this program was implemented within the school. They developed an MOU with the school, and she actually went into the school and had a session. Originally, it was based on social responsibility training, SRT. She changed the curriculum name to Mastering the Journey. We're going to hopefully have her as a guest on session 3, but just to share a little bit about what they did is integrating that program into the local school district and then also into the local tribal school. And so both the public school and the tribal school were able to integrate this training opportunity. She came in, she worked with the youth. There was a comprehensive approach in looking at each youth's specific curriculum goals. Also working with teachers to come in and engage with the youth while they were in the class, and then referring to outside services when needed. And so one of the aspects of this program was really trying to empower the youth to make healthy decisions, assisting them with increasing their school attendance through their own goal setting, and then really getting to the root cause of truancy. And so one of the things that was emphasized is that, you know, these youth were coming in with some really challenging events at home. And so it wasn't just, you know, oh, we don't have a car, we can't get to school. These were really serious issues happening in the home, and really trying to understand, you know, what are the needs of the youth that you're serving. And so I think that's really important when you're developing your programs, is looking at the fact that, yes, there are these kind of known, you know, social, individual, school factors that we talked about, but when you really get to individual services, you're going to be considering very specific needs of youth as they come into your program and as you continue to implement and develop services that you can offer for each youth that's coming in. And so I think it's emphasizing the need for, you know, some kind of curriculum that you have, that you're working with the youth, some set of, you know, standards. How are we going to work with these youth so that you can test and evaluate, like we talked about before, but also looking at how can we individually meet the needs of these youth that are coming in, and that we want to prevent further justice involvement for truancy-related events. Another promising approach is the Pasco Yaquis Attendance Achievement Program. And so they are going to be our guests next week, like we said, so I'm not going to say too much about their project. I would love for you all to join us next week so you can hear and talk with them personally. But this program has really engaged tribal stakeholders. They developed this model that was implemented by the Center for Court Innovation. So they're implementing that model, and they have served numerous youth with resources and referral offerings. Again, it's that holistic approach of wraparound services that are offered to youth as they come into the prevention program. This is a court diversion program. They want to improve school attendance rates among Pasco Yaquis students and reduce those future instances of truancy. And so they actually work under a Tawahi initiative. That was one of the aspects of the program, was this more unified approach for all their tribal serving systems to join together and continue to develop supports for the youth in the local school district. And their program staff work really well with the local school district. They develop plans and support the youth as they come in and try to address the very unique needs that each youth has coming into the program. And so you'll have an opportunity to engage with them and learn more about that program next week. And then I thought it was important to share not just a tribal approach, but really a state approach that did try to support reduced absences amongst American Indian youth. And I have shared a few files in there. If I didn't share this one, I can share it with you all individually. But this was a tribal attendance pilot project that was implemented in Oregon. This is a program where family advocates were hired to work specifically with American Indian youth to reduce chronic absenteeism, and it really was built on that positive approach, so promoting positive promotion of school attendance rather than that punitive labeling approach. And I thought it was important to share both successes and then, what's successful, what's not successful. About over half the schools that they implemented in did see a reduction in chronic absenteeism. But what came out of that study was that they noted that there was a higher need for trauma-informed care training for their teachers, and they needed to support Native-specific curriculum. So I think it's important to consider, here's what we know works. Sometimes what we do, it does work. Then sometimes after evaluation, we see hey, what we did, what we tried was not effective, but we can do some things differently. And so I think it's important when we look at approaches to consider both the successes and then the things that did not go so well. So with that, we are going to open this up for questions. I know today was just a primer. It was really more of an introduction. As I said, we're going to have session 2 next week, and then we will have a session 3 coming up soon. We'll announce a date on that. So this is going to be an ongoing series, so we hope that those of you who are developing truancy prevention programs or who are interested in developing a program will continue to be engaged, because we want to take this conversation further and deeper and really, support you all as you're working to support the youth in your community.
And I just want to add too, Anna, that as you said, that that this was kind of a general, and there was a lot of information presented, and everyone will have an opportunity to also do a evaluation at the end of today's webinar. There's a question about future webinars and topic areas. I think any of the information that we presented, long-term care, the series up with trust and what's the policy, especially when it comes to attendance, and all those things are good recommendations for future webinars and pull together some guest speakers about what they're doing in the community. So I suppose on your evaluation, and definitely when you have time, review the PowerPoint and think about further needs that the TYR Tribal Youth Resource Center can help you with.
Thank you, Alan. So yes, for next week, we have our guest speakers, Johanna Farmer and Annette Leva. They're going to be joining us. And we also may have a third guest. We haven't confirmed that yet, and so we didn't want to put anybody up there until we were for sure. But we do have them joining us. And then actually Kim Lambert from Lacoudere is hoping to join us for our session 3. And so we will announce the date on that. So you can get a notification for each of the sessions that we'll be planning. And then, like I said before, we're working on a publication to support just as a resource to help you as you look at truancy prevention and looking at developing a program, or if you already have a program in place, just information and supports for you. And so we will send an announcement out from the Tribal Youth Resource Center when that is made available to the public. And so we're really excited to be working on that and able to share it with you hopefully this fall. Also, thank you to you all who are in the chat and sharing and engaging with one another. Appreciate it. Anyone have any other questions or discussion points? Feel free to put those in the chat box before we close out. We appreciate you all joining today.
I think the Adobe Connect.
Yeah.
Oh, I was saying, I think the Adobe Connect system too logs the chat and everything. So any questions that people have are really pressing, you don't put it in the Q&A, put it in the chat box, and we'll do our best to either provide resources or to do some kind of follow up with those questions.
Thank you, Alan. And if you have, you think of a question or a training opportunity or anything else, feel free to email us at tlpi.org. You can also visit our website. As we said before, you can request training and technical assistance at any time at our website. You can also call us if you want. Our phone number and information are listed there. And we can connect you also with the National Native Children's Trauma Center if you're interested in training on trauma-informed care. So thank you. There are references at the end of this document, and we really appreciate your feedback. So please do take the evaluation. We take your feedback seriously, and one is to improve, the work that we are doing, and then two is if you have questions, like Alan said, or you want different training opportunities, please include those on the evaluation because we love to support you in what you're really looking for.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Alan, do you have anything else?
No, just we'll keep the conversation going, and for our grantees on the line, so some of us are your TTA specialists, reach out to us and we can provide more information. So again, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining. We hope you all have a good rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you next week on session 2.